little ones ask for bread, but no one breaks it for them. Those who ate delicacies, the wealthy, are desolate in the streets. Those who are reared in purple embrace ash pits. God grieves at the sight of the innocent and the vulnerable who are left without ability to meet basic needs, especially as the result of human decisions. It doesn't mean that God couldn't stop it. It just means that sometimes the most effective way of stopping it so that it doesn't happen again is for God to allow the fallen world we live in to take its full course in the lives of some people who are truly innocent and have asked for nothing. Jeremiah asks the question, Jeremiah 5, in verse 3, O Lord, do not your eyes look for truth? You have smitten them, but they did not weaken. You have consumed them, but they refuse to take correction. They have made their faces harder than rock. They have refused to repent. But it didn't mean God doesn't know what's going on. The prophet Amos had a similar experience, speaking of the northern kingdom. In Amos 4, verse 6, God speaks through him and says, I gave you cleanness of teeth. That's not a good thing. Cleanness of teeth in all your cities, and lack of bread in all your places. You have not returned to me, declares the Lord. Furthermore, I withheld the rain from you while there were still 3 months until harvest. Then I would send rain on one city, on another city I will not send rain. One part would be rained on, while the other part not rained on would dry up. So 2 or 3 cities would stagger to another city to drink water, but would not be satisfied. But you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. God will allow things to keep going as they go on until people are recentered as his people and as cultures in what is truly valuable, which is in his holiness and his joy. He is not obligated to us. And our hearts, as Augustine said, our hearts will not find rest until they are restless, in fact, until they find their rest in him. And God will allow us to continue drifting down our courses until we realize this, because it's the only true way to fix it. God even grieves at the tragedy and privation when people in loss seem less sympathetic. God, you may not have thought of this, but God grieves when rich people hurt. He does. Because every soul is valuable to him. He simply urges us in 1 Timothy 6 not to consider our riches as being in this world, and not to take our security in that, but to be rich in good deeds more than anything else. That's what truly matters. So, at times, I think I said this on a Wednesday night not too long ago, I think that many of my brothers and sisters in this church and in the ministry have a feeling toward me that I am kind of a Pollyanna about our culture. And actually, let me reassure you something. There is probably nobody in this church who is more pessimistic or negative about the situation of the world than I am. Honestly, there probably is. I look at the way things have been the last few weeks, and I urge you to rest assured, because they're going to get much, much worse. They are. This is not nearly as bad as it could get, and it will get much worse. Go enjoy your lunch with that. But it's going to get a whole lot worse than this. But what gets me up in the morning is God doesn't change. And the end of this is God bringing about change through whatever it is we go through. See, I understand, because God's Word understands that there are things worse than mortality, because death can precede mortality. Look in verse 6. He says, the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the sin of Sodom, which was overthrown as in a moment, and no hands were turned toward her. I mean, at least he's saying Sodom had it good. Because, Sodom had a gigantic fire, a rain of fire, and it was gone in a matter of minutes. And Lot's wife was gone in a matter of a second. We didn't have a matter of minutes. We had a siege that starved the city out for 2.5 years. That's what we had. And then he starts describing it. He says, your consecrated ones, the children of the priests and the priests themselves, they were purer than snow. They were whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than corals. Their polishing was like lapis lazuli. These are the glittering people. These are the Twitter blue check marks, the people who show up on Entertainment Tonight. It's funny to think of a culture where priests were celebrities, but that's reality in ancient Israel. That's essentially the role that we have a priestly class. The priestly class of American society is to some extent our academics and to a greater extent our media culture and our celebrity culture. And these were the beautiful people. These were the glittering people. But he says now in verse 8, their appearance is blacker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin is shriveled on their bones. It is withered. It has become like wood. Better are those slain with the sword than those slain with hunger. For they pine away, being stricken for lack of the fruits of the field. And all of this experience was allowed by God as a means for reflection, repentance, and thoughtfulness about how we got there. See, to suffer physically, especially in a way that robs human dignity at the hands of cruelly motivated people, before death, which is long delayed, is far worse than a swift and merciless death. In fact, if you go back and read Leviticus chapter 26, this was foretold and spelled out. There are things far worse than dying quickly. It's far worse to die very slowly, hunger and a lack of dignity. We must keep this in the forefronts of our minds. But the first become last. When Jesus said this is the future of things, the first become last when attention is drawn to the status, possession, or appearance of the first in society, and their ability to maintain the jewels that they possess is removed from them. And God promises that your status, your money, your stuff is not something that's going to last. It's just never going to last. And it's a gift from God when we realize that it can't do anything for us eternally, even if we lose it in a difficult way. James also said that God gives us greater grace. James 4:6. Therefore, it says, quoting Proverbs 3, God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And he goes on to say, in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5, you younger men likewise be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, for God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. And truly he does. So why is it then that some people come to a point in life where they are suffering and they long for death? One of the most difficult situations I find myself in several times a year is when I'm talking to someone who's very sick or very hurt or very, to be quite honest, very old in some situations, and they ask me personally, will you pray that I would die? I always say no to that, because I'm not going to pray for an enemy of God to prevail. And death is described as the last enemy of God and his people in 1 Corinthians 15. But I understand why people would ask for that, especially if really the reason you long for this is that it is better by far to be with the Lord. But why is it some people hurt so badly, as we see all over our culture, that we long for death? And we long for death. The reason for this is because we despair of finding ever in this life any sort of authentic fulfillment for ourselves on this side of eternity. And the point in life where we reach that realization tells us a lot about the state of our souls. What is it that we would have to lose to make us despair of life itself? I hope you never find the answer to that question. But in the case of the elders and the celebrities, so to speak, of Jerusalem, they despaired of life when they no longer had stuff. They despaired of life when they no longer had status in the community. And for some of them, to be quite honest, they despaired of life when they no longer looked attractive to other people. Now, friends, that's social media. That's all this is. We're no different here. Human nature is no better or worse than it was in 586 BC. This is just who we are. And so we can correct this. Because a life without God's direction will become a life of aimlessness for his people. Look in verse 10. Look at this mess, Jeremiah says. That the hands of compassionate women have boiled their own children. They became food for them because of the destruction of the daughter of my people. That needs very little explanation. When your children die of hunger and you resort to eating their bodies, that's as low as things can get. Compassionate women who would never think of doing such a thing. He says in verse 11, here's my hope. The Lord has accomplished his wrath. He's poured out his fierce anger. And he's kindled a fire in Zion which has consumed its foundations. This is where this chapter starts to turn. And I would argue get positive, as a matter of fact, because we understand God was behind it. And what God does, the hallmark, the calling card of all of God's work is that it is done completely. Nothing is left undone. In this case, there's nothing to redeem out of this mess. We're not going to rebuild on this. It's not going to work. The kings of the earth, verse 12, did not believe, nor did any of the inhabitants of the world, that the adversary and the enemy could enter the gates of Jerusalem. The lowest, that God is present, and God is never overcome by our episodes of complete devastation. God laid the foundations of creation. God made the heavens and the earth from nothing, and he spoke them. So if God created the heavens and the earth, I mean, God can build humanity back from a lost war, let alone losing a job, or losing your health, or even simply your appearance. God can build anything. And that's good news for us. God is responsible then, both for our destruction and for our renewal. That's good news because God has never been not who he is. The Lord, Psalm 29:10 says the Lord was present at the flood. He was enthroned at the flood. Indeed, he is enthroned over all nations. If God could bring back humanity from the work that he did in the time of Noah, I've been reading about this in my personal study, there's nothing he can't do. Remember what the writer of Hebrews said in Hebrews 13, verse 14. Here we seek no lasting city, but we seek the city that has true foundations where God's glory dwells. Remember that. The kings of the earth didn't believe. They didn't think that anything of this magnitude could happen to Jerusalem. But it did. There's nothing outside the scope of possibility. But God is the king of all possibility. You know what? Neither life nor death, or height, or depth, or any created thing can separate the love of God for us, which is in Christ Jesus. Nothing. Nothing. Not the loss of anything or anyone in your life. Not even a lost election. Nothing. Nothing. Because Jesus has promised, behold, I make all things new. He's doing that right now. The kings of the earth did not believe this, but it could happen because God's actions are hardly limited by our sense of expectation. God's actions are not limited by what we consider to be possible. Remember that when Habakkuk was complaining to God, that how is it that you could bring destruction on my people by the hands of such a pagan, wicked man as Nebuchadnezzar? God's response to him in Habakkuk 1 verse 5, look among the nations and be astonished and wonder, because I'm doing something in your days you would not believe, even if you were told. Nothing is impossible with God. And that's not just an inspirational verse that Mary gave us in Luke 1:37, the cross stitch, or put on the walls of our locker rooms. But nothing is impossible with God means there's nothing we couldn't lose. But we don't lose anything as God's people that he doesn't replace with something better. The question is, are we willing to say that what he gives us in replacement is truly something better? Or do we think God's lying to us? Consider the religious angle to this in verse 13. Because of the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests who have shed in her midst the blood of the righteous, they wandered blind in the streets. They were defiled with blood so that no one could touch their garments. Leadership among God's people, both political and religious alike, leadership is capable of it. Leadership is tasked with setting the tone, both ethically and spiritually, for God's people. And so when the ethical failure of leadership leads to the acceptance of injustice and toward a cavalier attitude toward holiness, it can't be a surprise to anybody when they are revealed to be as empty as they truly are inside in many outward ways. What Jeremiah is saying, in effect, is that it is worse, the spiritual condition of the prophets and priests who were defrauding the temple, defrauding God's people and living in all kinds of sexual immorality, at the same time reveals them, in fact, to be, before God, spiritually speaking, far worse than being a leper physically. They were completely empty of any status. And I see this, to be honest, in the church today. This has been a rough year for the church in America and for the world. We've seen so many financial scandals and, frankly, so many who are in positions of pastoral leadership who are taking advantage of people spiritually, financially, and especially sexually in completely inappropriate ways. God knows about this. And the tragedy of it all is that it ends with people who in the pews who believe, because they see that the Christian faith means nothing to their leaders, that it shouldn't mean anything to them. This is a tragedy to me. The Christian faith is not a hobby. It's not a hobby, and it's not a joke, and it's deathly serious. And leaders have to take it with deathly seriousness because it's eternal. And I hope that you who are here as much as you can will understand that it's serious too, and that there would be nothing in the leadership of this church that suggests otherwise. This is a burden to my heart, and I hope you understand it, because God is deathly serious about you. God sent His Son to purchase you on the cross, that you might be with Him forever. That's how serious God is about you. God really loves you. That's not just a statement. He really loves you. He's serious about you. He's won you to Himself. I hope we take Him seriously as well, because He's worthy. And a church that takes Him seriously will start with leadership that takes Him seriously. Do we? This is our question. Our time is short. But if we cannot call God's presence, whatever that presence might be, if we cannot call the presence of God home, being His people, then there will be no other place in this life or the next that offers us a better home. And we must understand this as well. If God's people do not understand the presence of God to be good, then you won't find a better offer anywhere else. Look at verse 15. Depart, unclean, they cried of themselves. Depart, depart, do not touch. So they fled and wandered. But men among the nations said, they shall not continue to dwell with us. There's no home with us either. Keep going. Keep going. Whom have I in heaven but you? David asked. Apart from you, I desire nothing on earth. My heart and flesh may fail, but the Lord my God is the strength of my heart. That's Psalm 73. Psalm 84 speaks similarly. And the psalmist says in Psalm 84, verse 2, my soul has longed and even yearned for the courts of the Lord, and my heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. The bird also has found a house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young. Even your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Where you are, God, is home for my heart. This is where I am centered. It's where things are right. It's where things are real. It's where I have peace. God's presence is home. And we're never completely home in this world. But where we find God, where we find His Son, Jesus Christ, we're as close to home as we're going to get. Do you call His courts home? Or are you looking for something else? Finally, God is just. And he's just not only with his people, but with everyone. Peter said it is time for judgment to begin, and if judgment must begin anywhere, it must begin in the house of God. But he says in verse 16, the presence of the Lord has scattered his people. He will not continue to regard them. Now they're in Babylon, they're all over the world, in fact, because they did not honor the priests, they did not favor the elders, they had no regard, in other words, for the authority of basic institutions of family or community or state or church. And a people without regard for basic institutions, for basic authority, are people who lack identity, a people who in time will lack social cohesion, and judgment will involve scattering that is socially craved. And the church is in the middle of this process because we have no sense of uniting authority of God, his people, and his word. And our most Western countries are further along in this process because we have destroyed the institution of the family. We are destroying the basic social institutions of the state. Look at the way we talk to each other. And we pick a God for ourselves rather than obeying the God who is. And this will lead to total social dysfunction and collapse. It's coming, and it will lead to the fact that the church will be thoroughly emptied out before things get better unless we have revival. He will not continue regarding. Look, verse 17. Our eyes have failed. Looking for help was useless. In our watching, we have watched for a nation that could not save. And then he goes on to portray the steps of the fall of Jerusalem. They'd sent for help from Egypt. And the Egyptian army had come to rescue the children of Israel from the Babylonians and were thoroughly destroyed shortly outside the city. So it says in verse 18, there was an attempted escape. They hunted our steps so that we could not walk in our streets. Our end drew near. Our days were finished, for our end had come. And in the middle of the night, after the city was breached, the last king of Judah, King Zedekiah, tried to escape the city by running out of a breached wall and into the valley of Jezreel outside the city late one night. And as Jeremiah recalls it in verse 19, he says, our pursuers were swifter than the eagles of the sky. They chased us on the mountains. They waited in ambush for us in the wilderness. The breath of our nostrils, the Lord's anointed, speaking of the king, was captured in their pits, of whom we had said, under his shadow we shall live among the nations. There is no army, there is no institution, there's no national entity that will bring us ultimate restoration. It didn't work for Egypt. Jeremiah called them a broken reed. But because God's word is settled forever, Psalm 118:89, our time is in his hands, and it ends just as it begins, which is according to his plan. And because God's ways are completely irrefutable, God's plan is inescapable. And there is no leader, no human leader who is exempt from death and disgrace, because no human leader is a savior to us. And every soul in his time shall give glory to Christ. Every knee will bow and every tongue will confess his lordship. This is just reality. Because David said in Psalm 20, verse 7, some trust in chariots and others in horses, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. We have no Savior apart from him. I am the Lord, Isaiah 45. I am the Lord, and there is no other. Apart from me, there is no Savior. And so the fact that God and his judgment begins in his house, though, hardly means that it ends there. Because, and I close with this, God is just. Jeremiah gets a little sarcastic here. He does this quite a bit, actually. And he says in verse 21, rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom. Remember the Edomites, the descendants of Esau? Those are two brothers who couldn't get along, right? Their descendants were even worse. It was a much worse version of the Hatfields and the Coys. Rejoice and be glad, daughter of Edom, who dwells in the land of Uz. The cup will come around to you as well. You'll become drunk and make yourself naked. See, here's the thing. After the walls were breached in Jerusalem, read about this in the little book of Obadiah. It'll take you about 15 minutes. The Edomites from the south, the country cousins, came in and just started ransacking and looting the city, looking for anything they could get and take home. And they thought this was just great, that our enemies finally destroyed. We never liked them anyway, and now we don't ever have to worry about them again. And Jeremiah says, well, have fun. You're going to get yours as well. And the punishment of your iniquity has been completed, O daughter of Zion. He will exile you no longer. Don't worry, it can't get worse than this. And it won't. Because God is finished. His work is finished. But he will punish your iniquity, O daughter of Edom. He will expose your sins. This is reality. He will expose your sins. God's not done with you. You might wonder, wow, Pastor Barney, that was a whole lot of wrath and nasty today. Aren't we in church? We're supposed to talk about love, grace, and happy things, and be inspired for the week. Well, here's something to inspire you out. When do you find a recentering? When do you find peace? When you realize that what God said through Jeremiah and the people of Israel, that his wrath is finished. When you realize that's true for you too. Because God's wrath is not endless. And it is finished. Because for us, see, we don't need an exile to realize that God is real and that he's holy. We just need the cross. And on the cross, a man who was nailed there, once and for all, suspended between heaven and earth, the God-man, crucified for sinners, and acceptable to his Father, once and for all said, it is finished. And the wrath of God was satisfied, it was done. And we can believe that. And then there's new life for us today. But you know what? Finding another Savior besides him, it'll come up empty. There's no other Savior. There's no other hope. There's none. How did we get here? How did we get in this mess? You could say it was some politician or a celebrity, a media figure, but the reality is we got in this mess because we're sinners. Because we want the wrong things. And then we go after the wrong things. We have a Savior who fixed the problem. So are you going to keep looking for another Savior? Or before it's too late, will you embrace the one you have? Because you're not going to find a better one. And may I say, I think he's a pretty good one. Let's pray. Lord, we love you and we thank you for your grace and your mercy, your goodness. And you poured out on your son something far worse than the loss of the temple or an exile. You poured out on him all of your wrath and your death. And it was enough. And we are redeemed. Oh, but Father, we find our excitement and our fulfillment and our sense of salvation and all kinds of cultural things and tribal identification and fulfilling anxieties about the world around us when Jesus is enough. He was always enough. May he be enough. And forgive us when he's not. And Father, I pray for one who's here this morning who doesn't know Jesus as Lord and Savior. And I pray that today his Holy Spirit would knock on the door of their hearts. And they would find peace today in your house. Be glorified in this hour. We